Thank you for watching Hidden West. Please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. In a quiet green field, as the sun rose, one of the most brutal attacks happened in Western history. For today's Latter-day Saints, Mountain Meadows is the most troubling event in their history. For 150 years, leaders and official historians of the LDS Church have worked hard to justify or explain away the crime, and yet it remains. On Monday, September 7, 1857, Major John D. Lee of the Nauvoo Legion, Utah's territorial militia, led a band of 60 or 70 Latter-day Saints, better known as Mormons, and a few Indian freebooters in an assault on a wagon train from Arkansas. The immigrants, known as the Fancher Party, were camped at Mountain Meadows, an alpine oasis on a wagon road between Salt Lake City and Los Angeles. The party consisted of a dozen families and their hired hands. The wagon train comprised 18 to 30 wagons pulled by ox and mule teams, plus several hundred cattle and horses the men were driving to California's Central Valley. The company included 140 men, women, and children. The women and children outnumbered the men 2 to 1. As daylight broke in the remote valley, gunfire and arrows tore into the wagon camp, immediately killing or wounding about a quarter of the adult males. The surviving men of the Fancher Party leveled their lethal long rifles at their hidden, pointed attackers and stopped the brief frontal assault in its tracks. The Arkansans pulled their wagons into a circle and digged a pit to protect the women and children from stray projectiles. Cut off from any source of water, the immigrants fended off their attackers for 5 long days. On Friday, September 11th, hope appeared in the form of a white flag. The immigrants led the emissary, a Mormon from a nearby settlement, into their fort, and then John D. Lee, the local Indian agent, followed. Lee told the Arkansans he and his men had come to rescue them from the Indians. If the immigrants would lay down their arms, the local militia would escort them to safety. The travelers didn't have any other options. They surrendered and agreed to Lee's strange terms. The Mormons separated the survivors into 3 groups. The wounded and youngest children led the way to 2 wagons. The women and older children walked behind, and the men, each escorted by an armed guard, brought up the rear. Lee led this forlorn parade more than a mile to the California Trail and the rim of the Great Basin. There, the senior Mormon officer escorting the men gave an order. By most accounts, "Do your duty." Single shot rang out, and each escort turned and shot his man. Painted savages, a few of whom may have been actual Indians, jumped out of the oak brush lining the trail and cut down the women and children, while Lee directed the murder of the wounded. Everyone was dead except for 17 orphans, all under the age of 7, whom the killers deemed too young to be credible witnesses and who qualified as innocent blood under Mormon doctrine. The first published reports of the massacre began appearing in California newspapers in October. The LA Star called it the foulest massacre ever perpetrated and added that responsibility for the attack will not be known until the government makes a full investigation of the affair. The San Francisco Bulletin was far less restrained, calling for a crusade against Utah, which will crush out the beast of hearsay forever. Public outrage grew. Americans from California to Washington, D.C. began calling for military action against those responsible for the crime. For the men who committed this atrocity, the legacy of Mountain Meadows became haunting memory they could never escape. Those more guilty of the crimes explained it with denials, lies, and alibis that twisted and turned as the evidence inevitably came out. Some of the killers went mad, some apparently killed themselves, and several fled to Mexico, but only one man faced the music and was executed for the crime. John D. Lee, regarded as a scapegoat by his descendants and historians alike. For the children who survived and the families of the victims, the massacre became a deep and enduring wound. they took the Fancher train's property and cash, which made its way into Mormon leader Brigham Young's pocket. Not a penny of compensation was ever offered to the survivors. For many living descendants and relatives of victims who have long been slandered as frontier hard cases who got what they deserved, the massacre remains a bitter injustice. On Tuesday, September 11, 2007, another wagon train from Arkansas arrived at Mountain Meadows to commemorate one of the grimmest anniversaries in American history. Descendants of the victims and their murderers gathered, as well as historians, to go over the dark legacy of what some view as an act of religious terrorism. But what led to the severe act of brutality? When drought and grasshopper infestations produced desperate economic conditions in Utah, Brigham Young concluded that the problem stemmed from a loss of righteousness among his people. In early 1856, Young launched the Reformation, a campaign to arouse a religious consciousness. Mormon leadership urged spiritual repentance and rebaptisms. All those unwilling to make the necessary religious sacrifices were invited to leave Utah. The most troubling aspect of the Reformation was its obsession with doctrine of blood atonement. Young asked his fellow followers to kill Mormons who committed unpardonable sins. If our neighbor wishes salvation, and it is necessary to spill his blood upon the ground in order that he be saved, spill it. The Reformation might have had a spiritual goal, but it fueled a fanaticism that led to the tragedy at Mountain Meadows.